Welcome to Crime Documentary. If you're passionate about true crime stories, make sure to hit the like button, leave your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe so you don't miss any of our upcoming cases. Today, we dive into one of the most shocking and disturbing crimes of recent years, the tragic case of 8-year-old Demeria Hollingsworth. In the stillness of that summer night, the house seemed calm. Family members were asleep, unaware that within those walls, a crime was about to unfold that no one could have imagined. 8-year-old Demeria Hollingsworth had gone to bed like any other night, tucked safely into her bunk bed inside her grandmother's home. For her family, it was supposed to be an ordinary evening, a safe space surrounded by loved ones. But for Demeria, that night would be her last. According to investigators, her own cousin, a girl just 12 years old, entered the room. What might have begun as a childish argument took a devastating and calculated turn. Surveillance footage later revealed the chilling details. The cousin took bedding, sheets meant to comfort and protect, and instead used them as a weapon. She pulled the covers tightly over Demeria's face and applied her weight, holding them there. Imagine the silence of that room, broken only by the faint struggle of a child fighting for air. No screams were heard, no alarms raised. The rest of the household remained asleep, never realizing the horror taking place just feet away. It was a crime committed not in rage or panic, but with a cold persistence that investigators would later describe as deeply disturbing. When it was over, the accused did not flee or cry for help. Instead, prosecutors say she attempted to cover her tracks. She repositioned Demeria's body, tucking her back under the blankets, arranging the scene to look as though the little girl was still peacefully asleep. It was a calculated attempt to disguise the truth, to hide the terrible act that had just taken place. By the time her family checked on her, they were met with what looked like a child resting. But that image of innocence was shattered when they discovered that Demeria was no longer breathing. What had begun as an ordinary night had turned into a nightmare that would haunt the family and the community forever. The crime was so shocking, so incomprehensible, that it immediately raised one of the most difficult questions in the justice system. How do you prosecute a killer who is still a child herself? In the days following Demeria's death, investigators gathered evidence from the home. The security footage, the physical evidence in the bedroom, and the disturbing details of how the crime had been concealed all pointed to the same suspect, Demeria's 12-year-old cousin. With the facts in hand, prosecutors moved quickly, charging her with first-degree murder and tampering with evidence. But the story did not end with those charges. Under Tennessee law, cases involving minors are typically handled by the juvenile justice system, where rehabilitation, rather than punishment, is the focus. However, prosecutors argued that this case was different, that the nature of the crime went far beyond what could be addressed in juvenile court. A hearing was scheduled to determine whether the young suspect should remain under juvenile jurisdiction or face the far harsher consequences of being tried as an adult. Families sat in silence as prosecutors described the act as cold, deliberate, and calculated. They insisted that allowing the case to stay in juvenile court would mean, at most, a handful of years in custody, a punishment that, in their eyes, could never reflect the severity of the crime. By September 2024, a grand jury returned an indictment. The accused, now 13 years old, was formally charged, and a juvenile court judge approved the motion to transfer her case into the adult system. The decision made headlines nationwide, sparking debates about morality, justice, and responsibility. Could a child truly understand the permanence of her actions? Or had the crime been so carefully carried out that age could no longer serve as an excuse? For prosecutors, the answer was clear. The planning, the concealment, and the brutality of the act demanded accountability far beyond what juvenile court could offer. For the defense, however, the transfer represented a potential life sentence for someone barely entering her teenage years. The courtroom became a battleground, not only for the future of the accused, but also for the justice owed to Demeria Hollingsworth. Each hearing, each motion, Each testimony carried with it the weight of 2 lives destroyed. One ended far too soon. And the death of Demeria Hollingsworth did not remain just another crime in the headlines. It became a wound that cut deeply into her community. In the days that followed, shock and grief spread quickly across Humboldt and reached even further into Nashville, where Demeria had been a student at Cockrell Elementary School. Teachers remembered her as bright and hardworking, a child who was always eager to learn and quick to smile. Friends and classmates described her as kind, gentle, and full of life. For them, the sudden and violent loss of an 8-year-old classmate was beyond comprehension. Vigils were held, candles lit, and flowers placed outside the school and near the family home. Community members gathered not only to mourn, but also to try to make sense of how such a tragedy could occur within a family. The image of a young girl, robbed of her future by someone so close to her, haunted neighbors and strangers alike. A memorial fund was established to cover funeral expenses, and messages of support poured in from across Tennessee. Parents hugged their children tighter, and conversations about safety, juvenile crime, and mental health echoed in churches, schools, and community centers. But beyond the grief was also a collective unease, a recognition that this was not the work of an outsider, not a random act of violence, but something that came from within the very circle that should have been safest. It forced families to confront uncomfortable questions. What could drive a child to such an act? Could it have been prevented? For the Hollingsworth family, the pain was immeasurable. They not only lost their beloved daughter, but also faced the reality that the accused was another child they knew, another branch of their family. 2 young lives, one taken, one destroyed, became symbols of a tragedy that words could barely contain. The name Demeria Hollingsworth became a rallying cry in Tennessee, a reminder of innocence stolen, and a call for reflection on how justice and compassion can coexist in the face of unthinkable violence. The story of Demeria Hollingsworth is one of the most haunting reminders of how fragile life can be, and how violence can emerge from the least expected places. An 8-year-old girl, full of promise, taken in the most brutal way, and a cousin, barely a teenager, now facing the full weight of the justice system. 2 lives shattered, 2 families forever scarred. This case forces us to confront difficult questions. How should society respond when the accused is still a child? Can justice truly be served without compassion? Or does the brutality of the crime demand the harshest possible sentence? There are no easy answers, only the painful reality of a family torn apart and a community left searching for meaning. What do you think? Should a 13-year-old be tried as an adult for such a crime? Or should the justice system focus on rehabilitation, even in a case this severe? We want to hear your thoughts. Share them in the comments below. If you found this documentary informative, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our future investigations. This is Crime Documentary, bringing you the darkest true crime stories from around the world. Thank you for watching.